Welcome everyone to LifeShot podcast. Again, for the fifth time, I've got Mr. Ian Tennant, Dr. Ian Tennant, who wrote a book, Restoring Balance. How are you doing today, Ian?
Very well, thank you. Trying to stay balanced with all the Christmas frenzy and
Oh,
middle
yes.
of winter solstice, but doing well with it so far.
So
And you?
Ian, just give us a background, for the listeners who and the watchers on YouTube who might be watching for the first time, seeing the Get Healthy series that we're doing now in conjunction with the launch of a new book. Can you just give us a little background of as to who you are?
So yeah, my name's Ian. I first trained as a biochemist, and I went to work in a kind of hospital university in Edinburgh, and I was studying how our immune cells recognize both foreign invaders like bacteria, but also how they recognize our own cells and how they do the the housekeeping and tidying up of our own cells as we continue to grow and our cells have a natural turnover. So I was studying those mechanisms, and at the time I had an interest in my own health, but I didn't ever imagine myself working the way that I do today and the way that you do one-to-one with people as a health coach. It was more kind of the science, the techie side. I had a big interest in the health of our environment, which I think we're going to explore next week, how we can, how we really, if we want to be truly healthy, deeply healthy, both as, individuals, but also as society, how we have to really kind of observe what's going on around us in our fields, our waterways, the air quality, and the ecosystems, to look at the effect on our personal health and our gut health. So we can't really separate the environment and our own health. So I had these, I ended up working in a lab doing very kind of geeky, techie stuff, but I had this big kind of global interest in the environment, the health of our planet. Then there was a long, convoluted route from being there to where I am today, talking to you about simple lifestyle changes we can all make to do the best we can, really, as the world around us gets a little bit more full of distractions, and modern living can be stressful for humans. But what we can do to stay balanced amidst all of that and still enjoy the best of both worlds, really.
That's great. And today's topic is a lot to do with that, I suppose. What I like about what you do, Ian, is that you help people to live their best life now, to be healthy, to take control of their health, I think is one of the ways you expressed it. And also how we can look after and control our environment so that our environment is the most healthy environment that we can live in. So, and I think there's a lot of emphasis on that recent, not in the last few years. I think it's been 20 or 30 years in the making of us really being conscious about the earth. And I think the more that it grows, this sort of, what they call it, a bioconsciousness is starting to increase. Young people are really, conscious about it because they're inheriting this world after the older generation. And, I'm kind of stuck in the middle. I'm not old, I'm not young, but I'm, I just missed the millennial mark,
Yeah.
But so I'm not a millennial, but I'm just outside of that on the older scale. But it's still really I resonate with those things that they are so passionate about.
Yes.
And also at the same time, I also like to look at body health as well as environment health. So let's talk today about one of the topics in your book, chronic disease, and how we can avoid it. And you've given me a nice summary of what we can talk about here. So let's step into the first thing you mentioned there. If you want to just give us a kind of a background as to what we've spoken already about in the last 4 weeks, this being the fifth series.
That's it, yeah. So hopefully some of the listeners have heard the previous episodes, but this is a chance to kind of pull everything together that we've talked about so far. So really, we chose this list of topics before we did the 6-week series, and today's is about how to avoid chronic disease. And what just to kind of define what chronic disease is, if we get a cold or a flu or an upset stomach, hopefully that is gone within a few days or maybe a week. But chronic diseases are things which stick around for a long time. So heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, certain types of arthritis are chronic diseases because they they can last a lifetime for some people. So one of the things I want to say first is that there's a difference between something that might trigger us to be diagnosed with a chronic disease and the actual build-up of the chronic disease. So sometimes a person might have a stressful event or a virus or some kind of physical trauma, and then they come down, then a few weeks later they are diagnosed with a chronic disease. But actually the build-up for that chronic disease has been happening for months and possibly years or decades. And it's just this little, it's the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back that leads us to be able to diagnose this state of health that's got a label of, has the label of heart disease or diabetes. But usually these things have been building up for a long, long time. So really what we have to then say is, okay, something in our life has been causing our body to work towards this disease state for a long, long time. So what can we best do to prevent us ending up in that situation? And the answer is quite simply is to live a well-balanced lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle for a long, long time, to live a healthy lifestyle, and hopefully will prevent chronic diseases. So that's it in a nutshell, but we'll break that down and talk about, what that means.
And there's also the English doctor who's been on TV, I think you mentioned him once, who did a series about this same thing, about not treating the effects of disease as a doctor, but rather stepping in before that and saying, hey, this is how you should be living in order for people to avoid coming to the doctor with these chronic diseases. Can't remember his name.
Yeah, is that Michael Mosley by any chance?
No, Indian guy, a British Indian.
Oh, Ranjan Chatterjee.
Yes, that's the one.
The four pillars guy. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
He's excellent. I really admire what he's done. His book, The 4 Pillars Plan, and he's just released one on stress, really, which kind of, it feels like that's his career evolving. So his 4 Pillars Plan was very similar to what you and I do as health coach. We encourage people to sleep well, to move well, to eat well, and to rest well. And really, his next book is, I haven't studied it, but really he's saying above all, if we're going to choose one of these things, it's managing our stress levels. And, hopefully we'll get to talk about that today, because stress can lead to inflammation. We're talking about psychological stress here, not necessarily physical stress, but there's a two-way street between the two of them. So psychological, by that, we can say emotional stress is part of psychological stress, will have a serious impact on our body if that's a chronic state we're in. If we're in a chronically stressed state, then that's going to have a chronic impact on our energy levels and ultimately our health. So Ranjan Chatterjee, Dr. Chatterjee, he's a GP. So he's got some lovely information, and he's got his own podcast online. It's really encouraging to hear more GPs, and we're seeing this more and more. The NHS as well is having to move towards preventative healthcare rather than just dishing out pills and quick fixes.
They've tried to do it with the your 5-a-day vegetables and fruits and such, but I don't think it's always been the best advice. Knowing what we know now is, because if you're into people like Mark Hyman and those type, you start to see the advice that was being given over the last 20 years or so has been not the correct advice concerning fat, for example, and specifically fat.
that low fat regime isn't the best for everyone. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and what we hopefully will get to recap on is this. We'll recap inflammation, the topic of inflammation, and how that affects our body. And also I'd like to touched on mitochondria, but as you're probably aware, there's so much talk at the moment about mitochondrial dysfunction. And so that mitochondria, for the listeners who haven't been tuning in so far, these are the little powerhouses in our cells. I liken them to wood burners. So the fuel we eat, the food we eat, has to be chopped up into little pieces before we can liberate the energy from it. And the mitochondria are like the wood burners that after we've digested our food, tiny chunks of food are put into the mitochondria, then they burn it up, and that liberates all the energy that can be transported around our body, around the rest of the cells, and allow us to do all these functions. So mitochondria are, it's pretty much agreed that these mitochondria were at one point separate organisms to humans, or as part of our evolution, they were like a kind of very primitive bacteria. And we've created a symbiotic relationship with them over time. So we've given them a home, and their home is the protection of our cells inside our body. And in return, they allow us to generate much more energy than we were able to do just from our, the cytoplasm, or the watery gel within our cell. They provide this little, it's a little bit like, letting the sun kind of come through your house and heat your home, versus having a wood burner inside your home. So these little mitochondria have done us a great favor, and we feed them with we take in food and digest it and give them the fuel, and then they do all the work to liberate it. But so this is it's a partnership we formed, and our mitochondrial DNA is separate from the DNA in the nucleus of our cells. But what's been appreciated more and more in recent years is that these mitochondria, like the health of our mitochondria, or the lack of the health of our mitochondria, seems to be at the core of many chronic diseases. And inflammation has a big part to play in that. So if we've got lots of inflammation in our body, then the nuts and bolts of these mitochondria kind of start to fail. They don't function well, and then we get something which has been labeled mitochondrial dysfunction. From that, we see all these other diseases, including chronic fatigue, which is on the rise, and diabetes, and so on.
So it just makes me think of we've got a whole lot of aliens within our body. We've got to look after them, all these little alien bodies. And most of the things makes me think of how your gut bacteria. So you've got these billions of bacteria that live in your gut, and if you think about your body, of what is comprised of all these different pieces of, like you speak about the mitochondria, and we speak about the gut bacteria. It's almost amazing to think that we are made up of so many different aspects that all work together in this symbiosis to create what we do, to think how we think, and to have love and emotions. It's just amazing.
It is incredible, isn't it? It is incredible. And, we've touched on this before. Where does the boundary start and stop between one human and another, or one, those bacteria and us? And we know that different gut bacteria can affect people's mood and affect their health. So, it's a very kind of fuzzy barrier between us and the organisms around us. And indeed, the mitochondria being primitively, they were looks like they were separate organisms. So there is really no separation, and that brings us back to, if we want to take charge of our health and to be as energized and full of vitality as possible, then we have to make decisions about what we put in our body, the thoughts we think, how we treat the environment around us, because it's gonna, don't want to kind of sound all esoteric with talking about karma, but it's, there's a continuous flow of nutrients and energy and reactions, really, at the end of the day, between us and our environment. We're leading into next week's topic, aren't we? But so that's it in a nutshell.
Right. So Ian, before we carry on, we just want to, welcome. We've got 2 listeners, Elle and Beyond Clean with Jim. Thanks for listening in, guys, right now. And we've got Ian Tennant on the line, and we're talking today about chronic disease, how to avoid it. And we're going to step right in now, Ian, to inflammation. Why don't we see what we can talk about is in regards to inflammation and how everyone should be aware of it. It's something that I never thought of until recently, and how the food that I've been eating, some of it can cause inflammation within my body.
That's it, yeah. So when we eat food, we're giving our body some information really about the environment around us. We're giving it fuel, but we're also giving it micronutrients, and we're giving it different signals and different information. And the body then has to decide: is this a friend or is it a foe? Is this signal encouraging me to upregulate a process in my body? So is it encouraging me to store fat or glucose? Is it encouraging me to relax and calm down? So our food really does all these. It's not just fuel, and it's not just vitamins and minerals. The food we eat will influence our rate of cell growth. You've probably heard of the mTOR pathway. So there's all these different like sensors in our bodies that look at all the different components of food and decide how to respond to it. It's almost like signposts. As you're driving down the street, or the food will be saying, okay, speed up now, or turn left, or turn right, or so on. So, and the purpose of mentioning this with inflammation is that food, along with all of the other choices and lifestyle factors that we can talk about today, will determine whether our body is tipped into inflammation, or whether it stays the balance, the redox balance, which I'll explain in a minute, is in a healthy position, or whether we're veering towards inflammation. So last week's episode, we were talking about technology, and we built up this idea that humans are bioelectric beings. So every single cell in our body uses a kind of charge or type of electricity to operate and to run. It's not just nerves that do that. And the importance of this in terms of inflammation is when we really dig down and look at what inflammation is, it's a kind of electrical imbalance. We've got too many something called reactive oxygen species. So these are byproducts of our body's normal function that are hungry for electrons, and they kind of go on the rampage and cause all this damage in their desperation to find a spare electron to satisfy their electrical hunger. And that's what inflammation is. So the fire of inflammation that causes all this heat and swelling, and if you've got really bad inflammation, you get loss of joint movement and pain. This is really when we've got too many reactive oxygen species in our body. But the thing I want to say is that the process that causes inflammation is perfectly normal. And this process of generating reactive oxygen species, it's a perfectly normal thing. We don't want to stop that, because it's actually this dance of electrons is what the mitochondria need. It's like saying all fire is bad, but we just said, it's really useful to have a fire in the right place in a wood burner in your home to heat your house. It's just when the fire gets out of control and burns in the wrong places. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So we want to keep this fire stoked up inside of us, but we don't want to let it kind of burn out of control. So we need to do things that are going to handle or tend this fire in a kind of just the right way to keep us full of energy, but not burning our the mechanics of our body in the wrong way.
This makes me one thing it reminds me of is the movie called, I think it's called Heal. It's a more recent one that was shown on Amazon. And then there were different doctors on there, which you probably would have recognized. And the one guy said that when you have heartburn, for example, he likened it to there's too much fire inside. And he spoke about the elements. You get fire, water, earth, wind, whatever it is, those elements. And so when you're eating certain foods, if that fire is too hot within your body, then you're going to get heartburn, or you might manifest other symptoms of inflammation.
That's it. I'd love to, if you've got the link for that film, I'd love to see it. And when we look at the traditional Chinese medicine or the Indian Ayurvedic tradition, and they talk, well, the Chinese talk about the five elements and the fire and the water and earth and so on, and the Indian Ayurvedic have, these different kapha, pitta, and vata. What they're describing, or what they sensed, or what they kind of, the science behind their observations, really are telling us exactly the same as what the deepest Western science is telling us today.
Yeah.
And you can bring it all back to the elements, in the sense we've talked about electrons and electricity a lot, but also the research. Have you come across the use of molecular hydrogen at all? It's the latest.
No, I have not heard of that.
Okay, so
what are they doing with that?
Electrons. So molecular hydrogen is basically what was once thought of as kind of a kind of inert gas that's all around us, hydrogen gas, and they thought actually it doesn't really do anything. But now they know that it has a very kind of powerful effect on our health, and it can penetrate deep into our cells, right into these mitochondria, right into these furnaces. And so taking something as simple as hydrogen gas as a supplement is going to be a powerful antioxidant, in a similar way as connecting your feet to the earth is going to, able to neutralize reactive oxygen species. So is breathing, or not just breathing, but taking it in liquid form, dissolving the hydrogen gas into liquid.
I wonder if because the Wim Hof method, we both practice that. No, I don't do it every day, but when he talks about that breathing, kind of alkaline, makes the body more alkaline. Do you think that's some of how, because we're breathing in massive amounts of air at a certain time, it's causing the same effect as that hudrogen thing that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's, and then you can start to appreciate using techniques like Wim Hof method or other yogic breathing techniques, or the Buteyko method. What we're really saying is we're working with the breath, and we're trying to get the breath to work in our favor.
Yeah. And
to get the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the right balance for our health. I've had amazing sort of results with different breathing techniques over the years, and I'm still working on it. It's an ongoing thing. And then we can start to see how this idea of stagnant air, or from the Chinese tradition, this stagnancy, if we're not breathing properly and the gas isn't penetrating to the right parts of our body, then things start to go wrong. The mitochondria can't repair themselves, and we get this mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's almost like the science and these old traditions are really starting to understand each other a little bit more.
That's right. It's got an exciting time, because that used to be just relegated to some kind of like, it's all a bit wacky, we don't know what these guys are doing, it's all mystical. But even Mantak Chia starts to talk about it when he says that science is now just discovering that the gut has a mind, and he talks about the scientific discoveries in regards to that. But the Taoists have been saying it for 3,000 years,
Yeah,
so it's an exciting time, and I like experimenting and seeing, what is it? How can we improve the quality of our lives? And sometimes we segregate certain parts of our lives into, that's this category and that's that category. But when we start to bring those different categories together and say, how does this represent the whole? Then we can start to incorporate like the spiritual aspects of life into the physical aspects, instead of just saying, well, they're two separate things, because our physical acts can be a spiritual act in a way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to the point of too much chronic stress. So I know you and I, we've talked about what spirituality could mean to us in the past. But if that doesn't, that term spirituality doesn't kind of resonate with one of the listeners, replace that with something like my favorite music, for example. So if you're listening to your favorite music and that improves your mood, and if you're listening to your favorite music as you're doing something that normally stresses you out, let's say, dealing with your accounts or something like that, then if listening to your favorite music makes that process of doing a kind of stressful event a little bit more pleasurable, we can see that spirituality, or something that's got a kind of a non-tangible non-tangible aspect to it. That's calming your nervous system as you're doing something which would otherwise stress you. And then we look at what happens to your blood chemistry as you do that. So by calming my nervous system by listening to music helps me handle a stressful event more easily. That changes my the blood, levels of cytokines and cortisol in my saliva and my blood, and that's reducing the levels of inflammation in my body. It's also changing the genes which are expressed in my body, and it's shifting me more towards a calm state. So we look at this parasympathetic versus the sympathetic side of the nervous system. So that's the rest and digest, or the fight or flight. And then we look at the long-term health benefits of living that way, and we see that can extend your life, prevent inflammation, prevent these chronic diseases. So the way we go about our life, and you could call that a spiritual practice, which I am comfortable with, but if that's not right for some people, then call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
But our state that we live in affects our health. And that's one of the ways of controlling our environment, really. It's our mental and emotional environment.
So the recap on inflammation then has been really good. Thanks, Ian. So we spoke about the processes that cause inflammation, and it's more than just food, as we've discussed. It could be stress, it could be pollutants in the environment, it could be a range of things. And we've got to keep that balance between, within our mitochondria. So if our mitochondria are damaged, we might lose function, and it might lead to chronic disease. And then you mentioned now making ways or smart lifestyle choices that support the body's ability to maintain this balance. I think you've mentioned some of it to me, especially because it kind of resonates with me, is, spend some time with yourself or in some kind of spiritual practice that reduces the stress. Get involved with some breathing exercises, do something physical that also shocks your system, but that at the same time doesn't shock it for too long, so that you can, your body can have that resilience to be able to deal with the stressful things. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we move on to our genes versus the environment?
Yeah, I think that what you said, that point about, we talked about it before, like what is the correct dose of stress? If I'm doing exercise, for example, how much is too much, or how much sleep do I need, and how much light and dark, and how much time on my own do I need? And I think that the science hasn't really come up with any clear answers on that. I was reading some research on this idea of hormesis. So for the listeners, hormesis just means a short dose of stress that creates a adaptive response, and as you said, increases our resilience. So exercise, the benefits of exercise are largely because of this hormesis effect, because it is a stress to the body. And arguably the same with a lot of nutrients as well. It's kind of suspected now that a lot of plant compounds are stressful for our body. So we have to get the dose of that right. And the research is pretty young on all of that. But so if we can't really wait for science to give us all the answers, so that's why we need to use a bit of trial and error, and develop some sensitivity to what's going on inside our body. So often the people I work with the health coaching clients, once they start feeling better and improving their diet, they notice how crappy their old diet had been making them feel for a long time.
It's that awareness, isn't it? That's building the awareness of how do I feel when I eat this? Yes. How do certain foods react with my body? And it's something that a lot of people don't give very conscious or focused awareness on.
No, that's it. And, because there's so much noise and distraction, they might have been, tolerant to feeling like shit with, their diets, their, bloating and so on.
Yeah.
And they were coping with that with, 5 cups of coffee a day.
I just thought that's how life is, right?
Running on adrenaline, and that's normal, and not having enough energy to do any exercise. But once they see how good they can feel, then when they start eating something, go for a cheap pizza or whatever, then they realize they feel like they just want to curl up and sleep for 4 hours afterwards. So that's, we don't have to wait for science to tell us how much stress is good or bad. We can kind of experiment and play with it. And again, when you get a feel for what inflammation feels like in your body, if you overtrain and you start to feel, actually, I'm a little bit more, it's normal to have a little bit of, notice that you've had a workout. But if you're feeling weeks on end that your body's just constantly aching and you can't shake off an injury, then perhaps that's a time to say, actually, maybe I'm overdoing it in one aspect, or maybe, my diet isn't quite right, or I'm not getting enough sleep. So we have to use our own body's measuring equipment, our own sensitivity, rather than just relying on science and so on.
It's brilliant. So Ian, let's move on to our environment and how. And when I hear the word environment, because I've heard it so many times in the past, I never think of internal environment, or the environment is always thought of as the external environment. But let's speak about both, so internal and external, and how it affects our health, and specifically about the genes and how they're expressed according to what the body is exposed to internally or externally.
Yeah. So people, a lot of people think, oh, it's my genetics that's causing this, or I'm destined to get heart disease or cancer because it's in my family. And yeah, there might be part truth to that. We, if we've inherited genes that give us a increased susceptibility to, so if I've got a gene that gives me increased susceptibility to a certain cancer, prostate cancer or Crohn's disease then it'd be tempting to think, I'm doomed and I may as well just give up. But actually, most genes that are linked to these chronic diseases are only, lots of people have them and don't end up with those diseases at all. So then we have to say, well, what is the trigger? And it seems that it's the environment and our lifestyle choices. So really, we have to say, that if you want to live a healthy life, and it's not just about living till you're 100 or 120 is what they're predicting is going to be the new life expectancy, but really we want to feel good now, and often the lifestyle changes we can make for the benefit of our longevity will make us feel better now. So when whatever we do, whether it's we eat some food, we do a meditation exercise, we go for some exercise, do some hot or cold therapy, what that's doing is giving our body a signal which will get fed down into the very heart of our cells, the nucleus of our cells, and that signal will switch on or off different genes. And sometimes and it's not always a case of like an on or off switch. Sometimes it's a dial as well, so it'll increase the number of times that gene is expressed, or decrease the number of times that gene is expressed in any given period.
I don't fully know what genes expression really means, but if it's turned on or dialed up for a long period, does it stay dialed up, and that might cause the disease to appear? How does it actually work?
Yeah, well, I think so the gene expression, sorry to use jargon, slip into it sometimes. So gene expression just really means a piece of an instruction in our cell for a function is turned on or used. So often this turns out in this results in a protein being formed, and that protein has a function. So it's like saying, okay, I'm going to go into a recipe book or an instruction manual, let's say a mechanic instruction manual, and use the instructions for running, a motor to turn that motor on, and then that gene flips the switch, and that motor is run until something comes along and turns it off again. So the question about how long that lasts, sometimes it's a matter of if we keep repeating the signal. So let's say I keep eating something that contains vitamin D, like mushrooms, then that will keep. So vitamin D regulates a lot of genes. It changes the expression of genes, and that's why sunshine is so good for us. So if I keep eating mushrooms, for example, or keep eating eggs, then my body's going to get a lot of this vitamin D signal, and that will switch on hundreds of different genes, and those genes will have hundreds of different effects on my body. So same if I go outside and bask in the sun, that's, it's going to do lots of things to my body, but one of the things is increase vitamin D synthesis in my skin. That vitamin D penetrates deep into the cells, switches on these genes, and then those genes do lots of different, have lots of different functions. And it's really those functions that determine our health. So one of the functions might be to, increase the rate which our cells grow, and another function might be to encourage fat storage, or it might be to activate a detoxification pathway. So again, people, there's a lot of controversy around detoxification. Some people say it's a load of rubbish because we've all got a liver and it's all working 24 hours a day. But we need that might be true. We might have the equipment there, but we don't always have all the detox machinery switched on and ramped up to full throttle. And it's our environment that can, and the foods we take in, that can determine whether or not the genes are expressed, which will allow us to detoxify fully, or a high rate, or not.
So what does it look like if you're eating something that's not good for you? Let's say we're talking about eating good things like mushrooms and eggs, and it turns, that's vitamin D, and it turns on the gene expression. But what if you're eating something that's really not good for you? That's quite toxic. What happens to does the gene still get expressed, but in a bad way? I mean,
or it could be a different set of genes get expressed. So if I eat, chocolate, for example, versus a really nice healthy dark chocolate versus
milky sugary chocolate,
yeah, or French fries or something, then you get two completely different set of genes switched on or off as part of that. So it's rarely a case of one food switches on one gene and another food switches it off. It's more a case of, our bodies are calculating millions of things every single second. So it's a case of the symphony or the harmony of everything that we do in life. So chocolate I don't know the facts on this, but chocolate could upregulate 20 genes and switch off 30 different other genes, whereas some food that's been cooked in cheap sunflower oil, which contains lots of it's basically full of trans fats, that may upregulate a completely different set of genes and downregulate them. But the outcome is pointing us more in the direction of heart disease or poor health, whereas the outcome of something like dark chocolate, for most people, and other people are going to be sensitive to dark chocolate in a bad way, it's going to be more towards pro-health rather than pro-disease. So I think that's the way to think of it, really, is it can be easy to get caught up in the fine detail of all of these things, and it's necessary if you've got a specific health challenge to kind of dig deep. But generally, I think it's a matter of thinking, okay, everything that I choose to put in my body, or every thought that I think is going to upregulate or downregulate genes.
It's almost like an orchestra that's playing, and if the conductor, being the food or whatever, it's good food or bad food, is either telling the orchestra to go totally out of sync and sound like rubbish, or the conductor's giving it the good stuff and the orchestra's going well. So it's the same orchestra playing, but playing in different ways that express either a noise that's bad for the ears, or something that's beautiful and good for the ears.
That's it, spot on. And that kind of coherence, when we listen to a piece of beautiful music, obviously, beauty is in the ears of the listener, but sometimes we want all the different beats and all the different rhythms and the harmonies to kind of sound like they're flowing in with each other and working together, rather than being chaotic and kind of grating on us. And I'm just reminded of this point of how our genes can express differently. We can see that in the plants that grow around us as well. And for a while I ran a salad growing business, and we had space on the farm where we grew plants outdoors in the field. We grew some in a polytunnel, and we got funding to grow some plants in a hydroponic unit. And depending on where we could take the same lettuce seeds and put them in 3 different environments and end up with a completely different product, basically. So the seeds that were grown in a hydroponic unit, they were grown indoors with artificial light, with no strong winds. They looked great, but they were just floppy, and they would go limp in the fridge very quickly.
Okay.
The ones that were grown in the polytunnel, they got the extra heat in the summer, but sometimes that heat was a little bit too stressful. There was too much temperature, and they would get scorched a little bit, and they wouldn't, if we didn't water them, if we missed, it was extra hot and we missed the water, then they got stressed too much and they bolted quickly. But in gardening terms, that bolting means they go to seed, they age too quickly, and you end up with something that doesn't taste too good, and it's small, and it's it's not that attractive. Whereas the ones grown out in the field, which had some stress, so sometimes they had a really a sunny hot day, other times they were battered by rain, and they had the wind buffeting them around. But generally speaking, and this isn't a hard and fast rule, the ones that had that variety of little doses of stress, but they had plenty of water and plenty of sunlight, they produced the healthiest looking plants.
It's amazing though. It can relate directly to what we experience in life, I think. I mean, if we're indoors all the time and we're in a fake environment, I think we know intuitively that's not going to be the best thing for us. And if we're overexposed in other areas like too much sun, we know what that does to us too, premature aging. So I think it's a good analogy actually for us to look at these plants and say, what can we learn from this?
yeah, that's it. We're not that different really from any other living organism.
No. Let's move on to let's move on to balancing the opposites to support your mitochondria. So you've got a few points here as to what we could do to do that. And when I promoted this show earlier on today, I did speak about that the opposites or the polarities of cold and hot, and then like rest and exercise. So let's talk about that in these last say 10 minutes.
Yeah, great. So really this is just a checklist for people, just to kind of make sure they're not missing out on anything, because it's easy to think, okay, I'm doing really well, I'm getting a good night's sleep, and I'm eating well, I'm doing plenty of exercise, but let's say maybe you've been working really hard and feeling really, really stressed and not spending much time with your friends or family or loved ones. So then you're missing out on one of the polarities, or a couple of the polarities, which is relaxation, which balances out stress, and community, connection with other people, which is balancing out that kind of all those hours spent focused, which is effectively on your own on work. So that lack of connection to other humans. So really, this list of things to balance is just like a checklist for people to go through. So movement and rest is one of them. We don't want to overtrain. We don't want to fatigue the body too much. We want to rest, but we don't want to stay too underactive and sedentary. The sleep and wakefulness. Sleep is something that a lot of people are neglecting. They're doing everything else, especially busy times of the year, maybe around Christmas with the partying. It's not a problem to be sleep deprived for
for
1 or 2 days, but we don't want to do that chronically. And then staying calm versus being activated. So that's it's good to be excited and enthusiastic about things, but we have to balance that out with calm. Otherwise, our stress hormones and the cortisol and the inflammation may build up.
It's hard for some people to switch off, though. Like for myself,
it is. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I think we all have moments like that, but
we just need someone to tell us, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Like
absolutely.
if you're going on holiday, please switch your email off from work. You don't need to look at it. Basic step number one.
Yep. my girlfriend came and told me that the other day, actually, when we were having a day together, and I was like, oh, I'll just do these last few messages. But yeah, so we all need to be told that sometimes. And then in one of the earlier episodes, we talked about light and dark. So we don't want too much artificial light in the evening, especially white or it's blue light, but it appears white. These LED and compact fluorescent tubes are not good for our health late at night, or arguably first thing in the morning either, or any time of the day, but particularly late at night when we're trying to settle down to sleep. But we want to get real daylight and real sunlight during the middle of the day to reset our biological clock. And at night time we want pitch black if possible to help us sleep and get
I've been doing that recently, even hanging extra sheets over my curtains, really, really dark. The other night I woke up, I was like, damn, I can't see a thing.
Where am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
What's the meaning of life?
Am I in? Yeah. Yeah. In my house, we kind of swap beds a lot because we got 4 kids. And so, I just never know which bed I'm going to wake up in the morning. But
oh, really?
It's all fun and games. Talk about not getting enough sleep. Yeah. So when you got young ones, you got to get used to it, and then I'm hoping in the next 3 or 4 years, get a lot better quality sleep.
How young is the youngest?
He just turned 3. So I've got a 3-year-old. Okay. My oldest is an 8-year-old. So I've got 4 kids in between those ages.
Wow.
So 3, 4, 7, and 8. Yeah. Busy times.
Yeah. Busy times. You do well to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
You must be doing something right.
Yeah. I think I have had a lot more energy. So since I've embarked on a journey of health coach training, and also just started this LifeShot health and wellness podcast, talking to a lot of interesting people on the topics that I enjoy, has really opened my eyes to what's possible. And I really want to make that available to people to say, hey, have you tried this? Have you thought about that? Here's some great advice. Here's some good information. And hopefully this 6-week series on Get Healthy is really going to help people to, be exposed to a world that's so rich in information to help people to take control of their lives, to feel better. And I loved it when you spoke about how some people have just thought that this is how life is. This is how my energy is. It's just how it is, right? But then unless you try something and get coached by someone, and I know not everyone's got money to do private coaching, but you don't always need to go. Not everyone has to go to a coach necessarily, but just to be intrigued and be curious about. And it's one of those things, the 3 C's, right? Be curious about what it is that's out there. Let's see if I can give that a go. To start to feel better, Absolutely. To start to live better, and to and when age well, I think. You don't want to be 100 and decrepit. You want to be 100 and still sprightly.
Yes. Yeah. Precisely. Yeah. So that curiosity, and the listeners will all have that curiosity because they've tuned into this session, and I think I'll just encourage them to keep on searching, because we can all get sucked away by other distractions in life. So listening to this, and I'm not particularly trying to sell our conversations and your podcast. I think it's great people have tuned in, but there's so much other useful information out there. So it's an exciting time from that point of view, but also, to be aware that there are huge distractions in our modern society. I was visiting my family at the weekend, and there was they just brought an Alexa, and we had great fun with my great niece, 5-year-old niece, asking Alexa funny questions and getting the funny answers. But we have to look behind what that Alexa product is and what it's capable of, and that it's recording information from us all the time, and it's going to be quite possibly going to be feeding us back advertising. And the electromagnetic fields from it. So we have to just kind of be aware of where the modern world is heading, and think, what can we do to stay resilient
and stay in control in a way.
Stay in control.
I was talking to some guys. I was also at a Christmas party, and inevitably our discussion went on to AI and what it is, what the future holds for human beings and such. And so it's interesting to think about how we have to, at this point, become hyper aware of what it could mean to us building a certain type of technology, and also as individuals handing over data to these companies. But there's a lot of awareness of that now. Even on BBC Three, there's a guy, Boatman, whatever his name is. I was watching it. He's creating awareness around zero hour contracts. About companies not paying their taxes, about all sorts of different things like slave trade. So it's a good series to sort of watch and have your eyes opened about what's going on around in the world, and to help also be a part of the movement that is going to take us as human beings to a better place.
Sure.
And that's, when we spoke about 5G and all this wireless technology, we should be steering as much as we can to shape the future of our world, to make sure that we can live in it in a way that's healthy, that's fun, that's vibrant, instead of something that's starting to tax us. We don't want to live in a concrete jungle like you sometimes see in these futuristic movies. I'd rather live in a kind of Avatar type world as opposed to some kind of concrete world.
Absolutely.
I'm sure everyone would, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, James Cameron created the film Avatar based on things that were, available on this planet and things that inspired him from the natural world. So he kind of might have made them hyper real, but it is based on planet Earth. And I think we have to remember that with all this, brilliant technology that allows us to connect, and it allows CGI and virtual reality, which are wonderful things, we have got a wonderful natural world around us. And as you said, with that awareness, together we can decide where humanity goes, rather than being led by some old assumptions or old ideas that might not be, serving our best. I'm sure humans, we will all adapt and evolve, but it's really, can we direct that evolution where in the way that we want to, rather than
in the most beneficial way for everyone, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it's been great talking to you about this topic. And
thank you.
I think to our last week is the ecosystems and how they affect our health. Can we just give a little bit of a preview as to what we'll be talking about next week?
Yeah, so we've actually covered bits of it today, but we'll go in more depth. So, we've talked about gut bacteria, but then we'll perhaps look at the effect of soil bacteria and soil other than bacteria, other microbes, and that amazing network. And it's been likened to like the broadband or the internet of the soil, and how that kind of affects the health of the plants that we eat. And then if they're more vital and strong, then that will give us different signals to our body when we eat them than if we've got weak plants that need pesticides and herbicides just to stay alive. So an interesting topic. That's just one of it, microbes, but we'll enjoy more of that conversation next week.
Well, I was just watching Naz Daily, who I quite enjoy his videos, and he's talking about how they could make shrimp now from within a laboratory. And he mentioned the fact that our seafood nowadays is actually quite toxic, especially the bottom feeders, because they're eating the microplastics, and there's a lot of sewage in where they're born sometimes. So as you're eating this seafood, just be aware that you might be putting some toxins into your body. I'm not saying it's true for every piece of seafood that's out there, but the environment is definitely playing its part, and sometimes not a good part in our health. So we need to, that's why there's, like I say, a lot of good awareness going around, especially with also David Attenborough speaking about, the 7 Worlds, the new series, and just, really highlighting, hey guys, what's going on here? We need to change something. So should be a good series, a good episode next week.
I look forward to that.
All right, Ian. Thanks a lot. We'll chat then.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Clint. See you soon.
All right,
Cheers.
then. Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.